Welcome to Commerce Media Matters, your go-to podcast for unpacking the world of commerce media. Here, we catch up with industry leaders on news, research, insights, perspectives, and everything in between.
Hi, I'm Nick, founder and CEO at Voodoo.
And I'm Paul, Chief Growth Officer at Voodoo. Welcome back to Commerce Media Matters, the show where we unpack how technology is rewiring media, retail, and advertising. Today, we're joined by Ricky Sutton. He's an award-winning journalist, a news executive, and founder of video AI company Uvu. He now runs the Future Media newsletter and podcast, and he's on a collision course with big tech and big media.
Thanks for joining us, Ricky. For the audience, you're basically the go-to guy for leaders when they want an unvarnished view of what AI and big tech are really going to do to their businesses, not just their marketing deck. You're the guy, the straight talker, right?
I'm happy with that description. Yeah, look, I think that there's too much mollycoddling, kind of everybody trying to be a little bit too politically correct on this stuff. There's some really big issues being decided here for 3/4 of the world's population. We should probably talk about it.
Absolutely. I'm a fan, and you may remember or not, but I have actually passed you some praise on another channel of the way that you get to the point, unpacking the model coddling. I think that you being able to do that in such a succinct way, not like myself, is really quite refreshing. And I can see that's really, really attractive to leaders who are just, there's so much change at the moment. They're all kind of, walking around in circles. Let's get into this, right? You've had a career. My understanding is you first and foremost as a journalist, and you spent a lot of time in video, coming into video from traditional journalism and then into a digital kind of space. And you've been in and around this space for a long, long time. You made the move into building AI very early with an incredible product. And that's my understanding. It was a long time before AI really got a hold of things. What did you see then? And is it what you're seeing now? Is it changed a lot, or you bang on the money with what you saw?
Let's go back to the beginning, right? So the transition from journalism to video was because Paul knows a bit about this. I used to be a war correspondent.
I do.
Wow.
So my job was to go to the scene of something, to write an article about it and kind of transfer people emotionally to what I'd seen. Video is a much more effective way of showing people what you're writing about. So video for me felt like it was going to be a natural progression for news telling. So it made sense that we would do it in video. The problem is that video is very difficult to make. It's expensive. It's then very difficult to distribute. So if you've made a video in London and you need somebody on the other side of the world to know that that video exists, you have to figure that out. It gets very, very complicated. So kind of what I recognized in 2014 was that I had to make this discovery and delivery of video more efficient. And so I used a technology called natural language processing, or NLP, which is what everybody's using now, to basically turn videos and articles into a similar language. Okay, so they could be discovered. Okay, it's very technical, but that's basically what happened. And it meant that if a video was produced anywhere, it would alert a publisher writing that story wherever they were in the world that this video existed, and then created a marketplace for them to access that. So yeah, it was early, but it felt to me inevitable that that had to happen because it was the most efficient way to distribute stuff.
And we were a big fan of the technology at News Corp in my previous life. It answered a lot of the problems that a newsroom has around video, as you're saying, Ricky, is like, what video are out there to add to my article to enrich the articles that we've got digitally? How do we find them quickly? How do we traffic them quickly? How do we make sure that they're licensed effectively, that the payment terms are in place for all that sort of stuff? So some really cool technology that you developed. We were a fan.
Thanks, mate. And that's core, right? Because really what you're trying to do is to say, well, what's the most effective way to tell the news? And the most effective way to do it is the way that we as humans most intuitively absorb it. And the truth is we're audio and visual people. So therefore it makes sense that we should try and find a way to tell the news in audio and visual.
Mm-hmm. And these big tech guys, though, they're running away with it a bit. I've been a fan of your frank storytelling like Nick, and certainly been following the antitrust news. What's the big update there around all the antitrust stuff that you've been following? And then secondly, do you think now Google's monopoly on search and ad tech domination is it up for question now because of the changing effects of AI and people moving from search? And obviously they've got the innovators to lever. They've got a great AI product themselves, but they're going to have to flick the switch off search to focus on that. And do you see it changing in the guard? So there's a lot there to unpack.
Yeah, no, look, I think the general rule of thumb here is that AI is probably the most fundamental shift in media, if you want, since the dawn of the internet in the late 90s. So, this is a 30-year change, and it's also going to set the scene probably for the next 20 or 30 years ahead. So you've got to be a part of it, no question. What we have got, though, is that the last 20 years, certainly of the internet, has created incredible monopoly power concentrated in very, very few companies, right? And so we're almost living in Blade Runner now. We've got a handful of massive companies that run absolutely everything. They're bigger than countries, more powerful than politicians. They don't seem to have any laws applied to them. And so, the past 2.5 years has seen Google in court 3 times and convicted 3 times of being an illegal monopolist. Most people wouldn't have said that was going to happen. Most people didn't cover that happening. I covered it every day. You have to have a hold or understanding of what's actually happening and why it's happening and what's the data that sits behind it. Or otherwise, how can you be successful in your own business? You have to understand that stuff. So I kind of viewed it as my responsibility to translate that into things people can understand and tell the real story. But you asked me what this means going forward, and does Google and the other companies still hold a monopoly in the future? I think that we've got a very interesting series of things happening right now. So Apple and Google have done a deal to put Gemini AI in every iPhone. That gives them 99.7% of all the world's smartphone will now have Google in its guts. That's another monopoly. Here we go again. So the tech companies have got their monopolies. They're under attack, but now they're partnering with each other. We really are heading towards that Blade Runner future where ultimately there's one company that runs everything. And so fascinating time, but will it last? I'm not sure it will. I think the world's governments are getting pretty fed up. I think that consumers are starting to see that this isn't great. I think that when people turn up and say, I'm a billionaire, that's not a badge of honor anymore. That's something to be disliked for. I think the world and society is changing. And when people get angry, politicians get angry. And when politicians get angry, they change laws.
Yeah.
Firstly, you're very brave with your reporting. And I'm glad that somebody's been holding these big tech to account, because I think some of the bigger news organizations are probably a bit scared to say it how it is. And you've said it how it is. I guess the follow-up question, though, is you talked about AI and these companies partnering. And what do you think the biggest misunderstanding out there is at the moment that people have about big tech and AI and where it's heading?
Yeah, look, I think some of these products are really awesome, by the way. So search is fantastic. The iPhone is fantastic. A lot of the technology we use is fantastic. The problem is that it's become motivated by profit, not by people. And ultimately, products fail when that happens. So we're kind of in the late stage economics of these things, right? If you break down the earnings of the big tech companies, right, every single one of the big tech companies makes more money outside America than in it. Okay, except for Microsoft. And the reason that's fascinating is because there's no more customers and no more money left in America for these companies. And so if you start to really dive into those details, then you can start to make some predictions about what's coming next. And what is coming next has to be that America's power diminishes, that these tech companies have to grow in markets where regulators are a lot more willing to break them up. And that means that they're deeply challenged. And so they're teaming up to build even more scale to protect themselves from that.
You've gone into exactly what I was going to ask you about, which is the tech companies are making money outside the US because they've exhausted almost what they can, and they've got so much control. There's a bit of a debate in kind of startup investment world that Europe can't keep up with the US, and we've just seen an announcement at Davos that there's going to change the way that startups work. You're not going to have to deal with 27 different regulations. You can start a company and it will run across 27 markets, which is a massive shift and a big leg up for the European startup and scale up and business community. Do you feel that, and from experience and obviously being from that part of the world, the regulation that may have been seen as an anchor to innovation and success from Europe over the last few years is actually now going to start to be one of their strengths, where they can take the learnings and the misgivings of the US from the past 30 years from tech companies and try to do it differently?
So I'm very lucky that I've had a bit of a front row seat to some of that. I don't know if you're aware, but I got to address the United Nations last year on these issues. And I also work with quite a lot of governments around the world, non-American governments. Yep. Their general view is we're quite happy to have worse products as long as we grow at the pace we need to grow. So this idea of having move fast and break things, which is the Silicon Valley ethos, I think most of the world would now say, let's move slower and fix things faster. I think that we are in danger of running away. We have a very shareholder-led world right now where everything's about making more money for investors. It's all about market capitalization, and the consumer's been left a little bit in the background on that. Yeah, we're paying more for our products aren't advancing as well as they should. I mean, I don't know about you, but I think most of the tech companies are 6 or 7x up in earnings in the last 5 to 6 years. I'm not. I don't think you are. I don't think 99.99% of the world are. And people are going to get a bit fed up with that. And, we're going to be talking today, aren't we, about commerce and about the future of advertising and marketing, right? It's very difficult to have a voice in there when it's being drowned out by giants. I would like there to be an opportunity for plurality and opportunity for innovation. And one thing I will tell you, dead set, is they don't know all the answers. They really fucking don't. And I'm fed up, actually, with them telling me how it has to be. It doesn't have to be like that at all.
Yeah. I was very aware of you being at the United Nations, and I knew you spent a lot of time looking in here. And I think, how are we going to regulate? And being AI now being at the center of this, will regulation really catch up with the speed of AI? Will all countries? We can talk about, okay, the US is going to be losing its power perhaps, and there's potential for other countries to kind of take some of that back and do it better and differently. How do you go about preparing companies or CMOs or the businesses, or talking to different heads in different countries around what do they do first from a regulations perspective? Because AI every day is advancing to the point where, how do we manage it? How do we regulate it? How do you get ahead of it?
Yeah, so I think the first thing to note is that AI has incredible potential for humanity, right? And we want to make sure that we do it right. So it's a bit like educating a child in school. If you put a kid into school and that kid has a great teacher that teaches them amazing things and wonderful values, then that child's going to be a net contributor to the world for their entire life. And that's going to be a good outcome, right? If you start off life with a young kid and you teach it some things that are a little bit wrong, or, things that are self-serving, or something you need to achieve in the next 6 weeks, and you're not really thinking about the next 60 years, then ultimately you end up with a child that's 1 or 2 degrees off what its potential could have been. And I think that's the danger we're in with AI at the moment, is that because profit is the motive, not the product, then we're seeing corners being cut and we're seeing problems emerging. That's a price that we'll pay forever. And it may actually destroy the potential of the product, which will ultimately hold back the potential of the companies that are building it. So we have to be very, very careful at this stage. And, I was in the very first meetings, Paul, this at News Corp back in the late 90s, when we did the deal with Google and allowed Google to reference our material in Google search. We thought that was the deal of the century that we did then. But what we didn't know was what was going to happen to search. We didn't know that Google was going to become an advertising monopoly. Had we known that, we'd have done a very different deal. But we're 30 years later now, Paul, and we should have learned our lessons, and we're remaking the same mistakes in AI. So your question, Nick, you asked me what's my advice to CEOs, CMOs. Look, the answer is try things out. I think you have to give it a go. You have to see how these things are. But remember that the value of what you do shouldn't be decided by the person buying it. We don't have customers decide the price of products. The people that own the product decide the price of products, and the market's become backward. And so be willing to say no, be willing to ask for more. I'll give you an example. So Reddit did a deal with Google. Google paid them $70 million a year for access to their content. Reddit then listed on the stock exchange, and its market cap grew from 6 billion to 31 billion. That was a good deal, right? News Corp did a deal with OpenAI for 50 million a year over 5 years, 250 million, and its market cap hasn't risen at all. And so one of those was a good deal, one of those wasn't a good deal. The job of all of us now is to look at what made one deal enormous and one deal flatline and figure out what the answer is. But what you don't want to do is suffer FOMO and just rush in because you feel somebody else might take your deal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, can I just, before we jump forward, I know I'm taking up all the time, Paul's going to kill me for this, but we've got the fastest growing and the biggest advertising networks, advertising, spaces in the history of advertising being retail media. it's still blowing up. There's, commerce media is being kind of, unlocked in all different areas. And even Paul and I are talking to a car manufacturer that's looking at this right now to looking at offset, and grow some of their revenues. How does a retailer that's now decided to become an advertiser and a publisher, how do they and where do they start, and how do they keep on top of it? Their things are changing rapidly for them as well. So you've got AI, you've got regulation, which needs to keep up, and then you've got these new big advertising, and what you just said then, these advertising networks are kind of being dictated so much by the market. Are you talking to a lot of retail media networks? Are you talking to these decision makers?
Well, I actually don't think that the discipline required for your car manufacturer is that different to a media company. Actually, I think that my focus is on media companies, because if I can really dive deeply into that niche and really understand that intuitively, then I can take learnings from that to lots of other places. But look, no one's ever going to have a competitive market when we only have 3 or 4 or 5 players. That's just an inevitability. That's not competition. That's monopoly. So that's always going to be a problem, no matter who you are, right? Apple didn't want to do that deal with Google. It had to, because Google's got the monopoly on AI right now. So when Apple doesn't have a choice, that you've got some issues.
Yeah.
But look, with retail and its ability on the web, AI is going to be amazing for the potential it can bring to it. Think about personal shoppers. Think about choosing the right product. Think about personalizing the product that you want to buy. Your car comes with 4 wheels, but everything else is optional, right? So there's lots of things you can do around AI and personalization. But I do think that consumers need to be empowered in this next era. And if they are, then the consumers will choose the best products, not the only products, right? It's a phrase I use a lot, but think about what the repercussions of this are. We currently have a survival of the fattest, not survival of the fittest. That means that some of the greatest things that could be aren't, because they can't get any voice. And so until we can find a way to let those, those new shoots of creativity and innovation emerge, then basically great ideas get crushed before they ever get a chance to see the light of day. And that's not good for consumers. It's not good for AI. It's not good for advertisers. It's not good for anyone unless you're the shareholder or a CEO of one of those 5 or 6 companies.
Not at all.
Just taking one step back to what publishers, what brands can do, what even the retailers can do in this world of monopoly and AI, the rest of it. I mean, there was a lot of talk. I've just come back from NRF, and the NRF, the entire conference was about agentic commerce. What's holding agentic back, though, is the ability to understand and trust the bots that are crawling their site. And so there is an element of control for brands and publishers that I guess they can switch off the bot. They can block the bots crawling their content. Do you see a lot of that happening? Is that the place where, premium publishers can still have an element of control? Do you think they'll do that? I mean, you referenced the news deal just before, because to me that looks like that's the last stage of defense for them. If they're smart around blocking these guys and value their content enough, that's one protection. But how do they protect themselves against, not jumping in too soon and making the right decisions, and I guess going slow to go fast? They're all in a panic. They're all trying to go, hey, boss, I know what we need to do with AI. Let's jump on this new news now today. And they're probably not thinking about the long-term repercussions. Is that the place where they can have some control, Ricky?
Well, we're talking about commerce here today, right? So no one makes a good purchase by rushing it, especially not a big purchase. Imagine you're making a purchase that's the entire future of your existence. It's like buying a house. You don't have to rush to buy that house, okay? And so you need to be considered about making the right decisions. But look, I think that the industry as a whole, and when I say the industry, I mean the world basically has been captured by these monopolies. And so if you're going to start to unstitch it, there are things that can change, and you do have control. So to your point on publishers, which are only a tiny, tiny part of the global economy, right? But if you're a publisher, then absolutely you start to block the bots, because the only way you're going to get the deal you want is if you have leverage. And if you put the thing that you think is most valuable out in the world and let people take it for free, how much leverage do you have in a negotiation, right? Almost none. So you have to lock it away, right? And the way I always tell this story to publishers when I sit down with them, and you're dealing with some fairly serious global CEOs, you sit down with them and you go, hey, so you tell me your content is the most valuable thing that you own, but by putting it on the open web, it's like putting all your valuable money in a box and leaving it on the street, okay, outside a bank, and then being upset when you come back the next day and find people who've taken the money.
Yeah.
That's why we have banks. So what you should do is take the money and put it in the bank, and then no one can take it away. But here in the open web, what you're saying is you're going to put all your most valuable content on the open web and let people take it, but you don't lock it up. So these blocking deals that you can do is a bit like putting your content in a bank. And then once you put it in a bank, you can apply a price to that, and you can have some leverage in this negotiation. So the first thing is there are thousands and thousands and thousands of publishers. I think a number quoted is about 56% of all global publishers are now blocking these bots. But the AI companies, Google and others, are refusing to change the bot that they have that searches for content for training and making it the same bot that searches for search.
Right.
So if you want to block it for AI, then you can't be on search. And so there's a bit of a blackmail happening here. But look, this will resolve itself.
That doesn't sound like these guys, Ricky. That doesn't sound like a trick that Google would pull on anybody, does it?
That is exactly the deal. It's in their paperwork on their website. It's in their terms and conditions, so it's not even secret. But that will change in time. Yeah. Okay, so we're starting to see marketplaces emerge where content is being licensed. We've got some companies, Microsoft is spending real money to buy access to content. So that market is starting to emerge. But I do want to go back to one thing that I know is very close to your heart, which is that the only reason that these tech companies are as powerful as they are is because of how much money they make. Okay. And because they make that much money, then they have incredible power and they have incredible value. And it means that they can buy other companies and pretty much buy off governments and do whatever they want to do. Here's a new data center for you, Denmark. Please get off our back. These kinds of things are happening all over the world. Yeah. But the thing that, again, gets missed by lots of people is just how reliant most of these tech companies are on advertising. And so if you have a look at Google, 78% of Google's earnings comes from advertising. Okay, 78%. Astonishing amount. At Meta, it's more than 99%. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, all of that money that's being spent with advertising with those companies is a specific decision by a CMO somewhere. And so when those CMOs are ringing me and saying, Ricky, how on earth do we have control and leverage over these companies? I'm like, you're giving them all the power by giving them all your advertising. And so it would be strongly advisable, I think, for the marketing industry to think about how it shares its money and where it puts it and to use that as leverage. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't really make a world of sense to kill every competitor in the market by denying them access to advertising and marketing funds just to pay the 5 tech companies, because then that just means that they become even more powerful and you have even less say.
Yeah. Surely that's the conversation that's happening in the back room, in the bars and cafes in Cannes. How do we get together and create some control again?
Yeah, so some countries have done this. So in Korea, they have a law that all the advertising that goes to US tech companies has to be traded through a government-run ad agency. Right. So they limit the amount of money that goes to Google and Meta in Korea and make sure that the money is shared across all of its domestic publishers and companies as well. So they have a thriving outdoor industry. They have a thriving media industry. They have a thriving radio industry because it's still being funded by this money. So look, I think you asked me what's the most popular misconception. I think the most popular misconception is that we're all powerless in this, but we're not. Because we decide what we buy and where our money goes. And ultimately, this is all about money.
It's interesting you say about the control with the content, that piece around publishers, because it looks like the big tech aren't immune to this either. We've seen Amazon sue Perplexity over access to, Amazon's infrastructure because they're going to lose the front door to the customer and that customer relationship if they come through Perplexity and they're allowed to leverage off Amazon's thing. So the big tech are playing that same playbook when they're affected by AI. So I think your advice holds true, is that, hold that important asset really close to you and limit the access to it and make sure you can trade it on your terms because that's the real value here, isn't it?
Prepare for a bloodbath, actually, I think is the way to think about this. You've got, if you put 5 sharks in a tank and you don't feed them, they're going to start to fight pretty aggressively. Okay. And so, these tech companies, as we talked earlier on, there's no more money or customers left in America. So they have to grow outside America, which means the second largest market in the world is Europe. And Europe is busily building laws that these guys don't like. And if you then think, okay, well, where do I go from there? I go to China. Well, it's even more tricky in China. So I'll go to India. Oh, well, hang on a minute. India's part of BRICS. So that means basically Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, massive markets. They're all partnering together and saying, hey, we don't like America very much. So those 5 companies are going to start to get really, really rough and tumble with each other. Right now, they're partnering up with each other and putting their arms around each other because it makes sense. That's why OpenAI is doing deal with this tech company, and this tech company is doing deal with this tech company. And these guys are all sharing because they're sharing the last blood they're extracting from the stone. But when that stone's dry, this is going to turn really nasty. And they're going to really, really, really fight with each other. And Europe is well ahead of the game here. It's already thinking about that future. So they passed a law in Europe that basically says, we are just going to assume that all of these tech companies that we named are basically gatekeepers, which means they're basically monopolies. So we're not going to need to prosecute them for being a monopoly. We're just going to accept that's the case. Now, because of that, every company that we've decided is a gatekeeper, and it's all the ones you'd know, okay, then we are going to pass laws and we're just going to impose those laws on them. So we're not going to bother to have a 2-year inquiry or a 5-year investigation or a court case that's going to take up tons of time and lawyers. We've already decided. And what we're going to do is we're just going to tell them how they play. So in the European bloc, 27 countries, they're going to tell them what they can do and what they can't do. Now, until now, the tech companies have gone, so what? Who cares? We'll go and tell the White House and they'll fix it. But that's going to go away when the money's not in America anymore. And when they need to get into more of that European money, then they're going to start to fight tooth and nail with each other. And it's going to be quite messy. So a really clever, somebody at the DOJ told me this a long time, the Department of Justice in the US that brought the antitrust trials. They basically said, we can fight the fight, but the best thing we can do is to set them to fight each other.
Yeah.
And I think the economics of the world are leading to that.
So just on that, get them to fight each other rather than we take up the fight. Something I am always fascinated by is there is a very clear precedence in the US around, and you used the word monopoly. There's clear monopolies. The US hasn't been in this place before, albeit in a very different technological age, being Standard Oil, but there is a very, very clear precedence that US went through this. I'm gobsmacked the fact that it's been able to go on for so long when the US has been in this position before and has done something about it very, very, very clearly and deliberately. Why haven't we seen another Standard Oil with the tech companies? Is it just too much control now?
Look, it goes back even further. Actually goes back 125 years. So if you have watched The Gilded Age on Netflix and seen the story about the robber barons. So if you go all the way back to the Rothschilds and the railroads and JP Morgan and the start of banking, that's the only time in history that's similar to where we are right now. So back then, they were even bigger than the tech companies are today. And the wealth disparity was about 12 or 13 percentage points even worse than it is today. And it was only when you got to that level of disparity that eventually the public rose en masse. And as a result, the US government passed a whole suite of laws called the Sherman Act, which is the same law that was used to prosecute Google and Meta this year. It's the same law, this 125-year-old law.
There you go.
Now, what happened then was they broke those companies up, and then there was about 15 years of chaos in the markets while America tried to find a way to resettle. And then there was an enormous depression, which you might remember in the early 1900s, which completely reset the economics of America, okay? And then America started again, and it's basically been going back all the way up to that same position it got to 125 years ago again now. So if you actually draw the line forward, sometime in the next 6 to 7 years, you should get to that same point. What the sensible regulators in America are trying to do is to see that not happen so it doesn't have a second Great Depression. And it's also why the rest of the world is going, well, we know our history too, and we can see this coming, and we're going to make sure it doesn't infect us. So we're about 6-7 years away from crisis, okay? Feels like crisis today, but you can imagine at this pace how bad it will be. AI actually is an accelerant for that.
Right.
It's an even bigger reason.
Mm.
I mean, we've added about $4 or $5 trillion in value to these companies since the AI boom began. That's accelerating this journey. So it may be less than 7 years, but we definitely need to do something if we're sensible to ensure that we don't end up in another global recession.
Who thought this was just a surface level conversation about media when you get history lessons like that? I think we need to market ourselves to the kids of today. Ricky, that was really, really interesting. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, it's just fascinating.
My pleasure. Read the Wizard of Oz. Everybody in the Wizard of Oz is a character from big tech because the Wizard of Oz was written about this period. So, the Wicked Witch is banking. The Wizard of Oz is basically AI. He's the tech companies. Hey, look at this amazing technology I've got. You better listen to me. When in actual fact, when you pull the curtain away, he's just a fraud pulling a lever. At the end of the day, right, these tech companies are talking about AI as if it's some kind of mystery element that's arrived on a meteorite from the other side of the world. It's just maths in a computer, but they're the only ones with the computers big enough to make it work. So it looks like magic to everybody else. At the end of the day, it's just numbers.
And the money to keep pushing it and build the infrastructure that takes to power it and the rest of it. So with AI and the event here, and the old game used to be rank on a page for Google, which you were obviously, well versed in, original text articles through to how to get your videos surfacing there. What's the new game, and how should brands think about that in their strategy? I guess AI is great. It's taken a whole heap of share off search from consumers starting their journey around product selections and things by asking questions and conversating and the rest of it. That's great when you've got a task and you're looking for a product, but how do we get new products in front of people these days?
Yeah.
So there's a bit of a double banger question there.
Oh, I think this is the most exciting thing of all. So look, I think the dotcom era is sunsetting. So I think that dotcom made a ton of sense, but so did MP3, right? So I think that we're starting to see the end of this era. It's getting a bit long in the tooth. There's only so much you can do with a website, and frankly, I don't really think the AI companies or the tech companies are really that focused on .com anymore. I think the open web. There was a line in one of the Google documents which they really quickly redacted in one of their court cases, where they basically said the open web's dead, so we're moving on, and then they redacted it about a week later. So if they're putting that down in court papers and then taking it out, that doesn't only tell you they think it because they put it in the court papers. It shows you they're definitely thinking it because they took it back out. So I think that that's the takeaway. So the answer to your question is that we're going to have to find new ways to communicate with people with the new technology that we have. And that was why I created my AI company 10 years ago. It was because I genuinely believe that the future of news telling and all information dissemination will be audio and visual. So the way we're talking right now, I'm literally using mannerisms with my hands. I'm reading how you guys are reacting to what I'm saying from the signals that I'm getting from you. Technology can do all of that as well. You've started to see some of this new technology having conversations with AI. It's learning your intonations. It's learning your preferences. I think that's going to be the way. And so it makes sense that as the web becomes more human-like, artificial intelligence, right? Then that's going to be the way that we communicate. We're going to sell products incredibly differently. But if you get it right, think what the rapport is like between you and your favorite product when you can have a conversation with it, or when you can actually learn from it, or you can be part of the decision making of what that product might be. I think that that's going to be it. So the distance between you and the consumer as a product is going to disappear to near zero, and the most successful companies will be the ones that get there first. Let me give you a real world example. Paul knows this. I used to run a massive newspaper in the UK. It's 60 million readers, okay? And I used to write a story on the front page and publish it, and then I would wait 3 weeks, and then I'd see the circulation numbers, and I'd know if I'd done a good job or not. Yep. So I thought that was my feedback mechanism. Now I run a newsletter. If I write a newsletter and then publish it to the world and people like it or don't like it, they talk to me about it the next day or even within an hour. And so it's like a full body contact now. So instead of me shouting at 60 million people and hoping they like it, I now get feedback from my audience within 5 minutes telling me that they liked it or they didn't. I think that's what the product relationship's going to be in an AI future. People are going to want to be very, very conversational with the brands that they care about the most. And if those brands let them down, those brands are going to get a pretty rude awakening quite quickly when the masses tell them what they think.
So moving from megaphone to dialogue, really, true dialogue.
I think it removes the tech companies from the interaction. I think you can have a one-to-one relationship with that technology.
Interesting.
When you talk about websites and products and discoverability of products, and that's all happening inside AI platforms, what happens to the traditional e-com websites? What happens to those e-commerce players that are now building out these massive retail media networks and are driving these huge amounts of revenue? You look, and you also talked about at the start. You talk about these. A lot of these companies are making money now because they've got advertising. I think Instacart wasn't actually making any money until it turned the ads on. What are they doing? Is simply that through their partnerships with AI, they're not going to have their own. If everyone's shopping inside these new spaces, what happens to those traditional .com e-com websites?
Yeah. Well, I think they move into the AI era in the same way as, we used to sell cars in the classifieds in the newspaper, right? So, we've seen that market transition and we'll see it transition again. I quite like the idea. If I'm a brand and I've got an ability to have a one-to-one relationship with my audience, maybe I'll just put a QR code on every product I sell and I can actually have a conversation with it directly, right? I think that there are lots of ways to drill into this, but I do genuinely think that this is a revolutionary change. I think this is a step change, okay, a technological step change. But the upsides, if you get it right, are going to be so huge. Okay. Do you remember back in the day when everybody was an Apple fanboy, and if you said anything naughty about Apple, people would be on you in like 5 seconds flat. Oh, you don't understand. Oh, blah, blah, blah.
We've got one right here. Don't say boo about it. We'll come for you.
Well, there you go. And so that's because Apple built a brilliant relationship and a brilliant brand with its audience. But imagine if it was able to have a direct conversation and be much more close to them, or actually impact on the creation of those products. I think that's where the play is going to be. So you're asking me, is this doomsday? Is AI doomsday for the .com commerce market? I don't think it's doomsday. I think it's 6-7 years away from the full transition, but I do think it's the beginning of a change. And you do have to change to the market.
Yeah.
Consumers will demand it, right? If you think about the way consumers react today with products they're unhappy about, they can kill a product very quickly on Instagram, right? So what you want to do is, if that conversation is going to happen, I think if you're the brand, you want to have that conversation with your audience directly and address it. And AI really enables that.
Yeah.
I think all the talk at NRF was about the UCP protocols, because Gemini and OpenAI are now such a huge part of the consumer journey. It used to be all search. Now that's shifting at rapid pace. And so we're going to see it. But does that just see history repeating itself again, Ricky? Because again, OpenAI is different, but Gemini seems to be the leader, as you were just saying before. Does that still mean there's still Google in the mix here controlling? Because what I'm seeing is that OpenAI and Google are giving these free protocols because the transaction can now happen within Gemini. But that still gives them the monopoly, doesn't it? Because that's where all the people are. That's where all the questions with AI are happening. And therefore, they control the marketplace again. Are we not just seeing history repeat itself? How do we move away from Google just eating the world times 2?
Yes, 100%. You're right. That's what we were talking about earlier on. So we do have a situation where at the moment, only those tech companies have the money and the infrastructure to be able to build something the scale that the world needs next. At the moment, you do think that, hey, it has to be Google Gemini, or it has to be OpenAI, or it might be Microsoft, or it's going to be Amazon. The answer is it's probably going to be all of them, and they're all going to fight in this space. But that's why you need to have different regulations this time. That's why you need to have different guardrails and different rules. And so we don't want to perpetuate these monopolies on for another 20 years, because if we do, they're already bigger than most European countries. We don't want a situation where they're bigger than Europe itself. And so we do need to regulate this. What I actually predict is going to happen here, and I've written a little bit about this, is that we're starting to see the emergence of a splinter net, where we're seeing national countries putting up regulations that say, hey, look, we're going to control where our data goes. We're not going to allow it to roll offshore to other countries without regulations. We are going to control. So our data from our consumers and our nationals will stay within our borders, and we will use it. If that happens, then it's going to be very difficult for these tech companies to have a homogeneous AI that works for everybody in the world in one size. it means you're going to have AIs in every country that are going to be doing elements of this work. And when that happens, then you're going to have a patchwork quilt, and that's going to create competition. So Mistral popping up, you've got AIs in virtually every country in the world's got a sovereign AI now. So I do think that that's going to start to control this. But, as we're obviously seeing, you guys are seeing every day, America doesn't want that to happen. America's entire stock market, its entire stock market is reliant on those 5 companies. If any one of those companies catches a cold, America goes into recession. So you have a situation right now where there is a geopolitical element to this, a national security element to this. Honestly, that's the result of us not regulating these companies in the last 10 years, to your point, Nick, when we should have done, when they were still small enough for us to help them reset their direction. Right now, they're runaway trains going down a hill with no brakes, and I don't think they know how to stop.
No, it doesn't appear so. They're kind of let loose, and they can't be stopped. When, especially within their own geographic borders, it might be different with different ways of thinking coming from another big market, like you say, with Europe. And those regulations that have been put in place in the past that might have been seen a way of holding them back is actually going to be a positive moving forward.
Yeah, it might not come from Europe. There are the fastest rising economies in the world are in Africa and India. They're the ones that are going to control the money in the next 15 years. So in the time frame that we're talking about change having to happen, those companies are going to become increasingly dominant.
So we have gone deep on AI regulation, laws, governments. I think that we could probably do a dedicated podcast to this because Paul and I are fascinated by it, and you're right in the weeds with all of this. And I think there's lots of things we can pull from this in regards to the space that we work in and what this conversation is about. So if we pull this back and we zoom in on commerce and retail media specifically, knowing all the changes with our AI, the regulations that they're trying to impose, the growth in different areas, the markets that are growing, what's the end game? Where's retail media and commerce media going in this crazy world that's changing so fast and is developing all this new technology? What's the end game for these brand new massive advertising networks, which to your point, aren't all controlled by big tech? It's kind of like a final frontier where businesses can operate without having, the 5 overlords on top kind of eating it all up. So what is the end game for these networks?
Yeah, so look, at the end of the day, for the tech companies, the goal is all the money, not just some of the money or most of the money, is all of the money. So they are going to want to compete in this space. And there are some really interesting clues to this. If you go and analyze what the AI bots that Paul was talking about, what they're actually sucking up, you can see that they're not really that interested in news, but they're desperately interested in retail. And they are looking at sucking up as much information as they can to work out where the most fertile verticals are going to be. And of course, the highest yielding thing of all, as you guys would know better than anyone, is in online retail. So if you can actually sell a product directly, then the margin is far higher than it is advertising that product, right? On that basis, they are definitely headed down that path, and they're going to compete very hard for it, which is a real challenge. Okay, so I think we need to be aware that that's the first thing, is that they're not going to walk away from this. They see it as an incredibly valuable space. So I can tell you right now that, across the 100 million or so keywords that we investigated over 30 days with a group of global publishers, every single vertical that the AI companies were prioritizing were the ones with the highest CPMs and the ability to sell: travel, beauty, fitness, cars. So they are already fishing for those big fish in that space.
It's interesting you say where they're looking, because when Google launched AI overviews, it was based off the editorial reviews of the publishers in those core segments that you could see. And they launched with the AI overviews in the more profitable areas of the business, and almost wiped out 30 to 40% of the revenue for, commerce businesses that publishers were launching, like CNN's Underscored and, News Corp's checkout.com.au, all those businesses that relied on their editorial recommendation and review of the product. And then they launched AI overviews, trained off that language, because they knew that's where the traffic was and that's where the opportunity was for them, that direct purchase piece.
Yeah.
So that's backed up with their actions, what you just said, Ricky. I mean, we experienced that firsthand when I was at News. And so, yeah, you're spot on the money.
So I always explain this to editors by saying that, look, the reason we have a travel magazine isn't because we're desperately in love with travel. It's because it's a very high yielding advertising space. Same reason we have a car magazine, right? And so these are all the things that the AI companies are learning for the first time. So they can see the numbers too. And so there will be strong competition. So that gives incredible opportunities to people that want to help those AI companies succeed in those spaces. It may be that in future, major travel organizations have their own licensing deals with AI so they can deal directly with their customers. So I don't view this as a doomsday thing. I view it as an opportunity thing, but people are going to need to be fast and nimble.
Well, Ricky, it's been brilliant, and we've gone deep, as Nick was just saying before. Thanks again for being that honest, cutting through the noise approach. Just hearing you speak about the 125-year-old law, etc. You're a wealth of knowledge, and we thank you so much for sharing it with us today. Now, the last thing we always do is play a little game. So Nick's going to talk you through the little word association game.
Yeah. Our little game pales in significance to the depth that we've just gone with you, Ricky. So bear with us. But yeah, we've really appreciated. Just love the conversation. Let's go with quick fire questions. We'll throw them at you. What's the last thing you bought online?
Whiskey. I collect single malt whiskey. Yeah.
Whiskey. You're a whiskey man?
Oh, it's very nice. It was a 26-year-old Glenlivet.
Very nice. What podcast is Ricky Sutton listening to right now?
Interesting. I like the Verge cast from the Verge magazine talking about inside tech.
The Vergecast, great. Okay, cool. What's your go-to online shop? Is it the whiskey retailer?
My online go-to shop. I'm also a ridiculous surf addict, so I spend a lot of time on surfing websites buying the rarest surfboards I can find. So I like rare whiskey, and I like surfing, sushi, and single malt. It's all S's for me. So if I'm doing online shopping, it's something beginning with S.
Are you TikTok? Are you a watcher or a poster?
No, I'm a regulator. I spend most of my time trying to get my kids off it.
Have you ever bought anything on social media?
Yeah, I have. I'm sorry, though. It's also a surfboard. And I recently bought this office chair.
Yeah, look, we're all purchasing on social as well. What's your most memorable, this is the last one, what is your most memorable ad campaign? And I'm sure you've seen a few.
Oh, it has to be the Old Spice, I'm on a horse. Yeah, no, I think that's the one I enjoy the most. And some diamonds.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember it well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Look, we should do this again. Thank you for joining us today. If we do it again, though, that Glenlivet's got to come out. I've got some of my own. I quite like a single malt myself. So thank you for joining us. It's been great.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks, Ricky. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Commerce Media Matters podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow and subscribe. We're always on the pulse of the ever-changing landscape of commerce media, ready to share the newest trends, insightful perspectives, and expert opinions with you. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and keep making media that matters. This podcast is executively produced and edited by Priya Tahazadeh, with co-producers Sandy Ho and me, Rachel Fang. This podcast is recorded on the lands of the Bidjigal, Gadigal, and Wurundjeri people, and we wish to acknowledge them as the traditional owners of the land.